St. Mary's General Hospital was known for its prestige and medical excellence in a thriving community, but everything was about to change. When Liana Brooks, a talented African-American nurse, joined the staff, she didn't imagine the prejudice she would encounter in its hallways. Tensions began to rise, and every day it became more difficult for her to deal with her surroundings. Meanwhile, a seemingly ordinary patient, Victor Harris, watched silently from his bed, though he wasn't just any patient. Victor's presence was about to alter everything, becoming an unexpected force for change. The atmosphere in the hospital corridors seemed almost flawless under the bright lights, but for Liana, who was taking her first steps there, it felt tense and unwelcoming. Determined to make a good first impression, Liana headed to the nurse's station. As soon as he arrived, he noticed that the conversations faded into whispers and the gazes avoided meeting his. With firm serenity, he asked, "Excuse me, I'm Liana Brooks, the new nurse. Could you tell me where the head nurse's office is?" A blonde nurse looked up, and after a brief blink, smiled politely but coldly. "Of course. Continue down the corridor. It's the third door on the right." Liana thanked her and advanced down the corridor, feeling observed. His footsteps echoed in silence until, as he approached the office, a tall man of distinguished bearing appeared. It was Dr. Alan Sutter, a stern-looking doctor, known to be an authority on the hospital. With a hopeful smile, Liana greeted him. "Good morning, Doctor. I'm Liana Brooks, the new nurse. It is a pleasure to meet you." Dr. Sutter looked her up and down and answered coldly. "Dr. Alan Sutter, I trust that you have been well guided on the protocols. Here at St. Mary's, we hold ourselves to very high standards, and I hope you're prepared to meet them." Without waiting for an answer, the doctor walked by, leaving Liana with her hand outstretched and feeling discouraged. However, he didn't let this affect his attitude. She took a deep breath and knocked on the head nurse's door, remembering her mother's words from when she was in nursing school. "You're going to have to fight twice as hard as everyone else, but never let them see you fall." With that determination, Liana was ready to face the challenges of her new job at St. Mary's General Hospital, never imagining that her presence and Victor Harris's unexpected intervention would set in motion a radical change in the hospital. After that first bitter impression, Liana's day continued with a series of presentations and administrative tasks. Although he tried to make friends and strike up conversation, the other nurses responded in a distant manner, avoiding any interaction beyond what was strictly necessary. Megan Lewis, a nurse he tried to talk to, barely responded in monosyllables before walking away. As she walked through the hospital, she noticed the subtle murmurs and stares that followed her at every turn. Every attempt to integrate seemed to be met with a wall of coldness. The atmosphere was suffocating, and by the end of her shift, Liana was feeling emotionally drained. On the way to the bus stop, Liana decided to call her mother, looking for support in that comforting voice that always gave her strength. As she answered, her mother noticed the sadness in her tone instantly. "I knew as soon as I heard your voice, darling. How was your first day?" Liana let out a sigh and with a trembling voice told him everything. Despite the bad taste in his mouth that his day had left him, his mother responded with the words that always reminded him of his purpose and strength. "Liana Marie Brooks, you're not there just for yourself. You're there for all the girls who one day dream of working in those halls. You are strong and capable, and you will overcome this as you always do." As the call ended, a sleek black car pulled up next to the stop. It was Dr. Sutter who watched her briefly before continuing on her way, leaving Liana with a mixture of anger and helplessness at her arrogant attitude. Liana's second day in the hospital was no less challenging. As soon as she walked through the doors, she was greeted by a series of complicated tasks. His colleagues, especially Dr. Sutter, seemed determined to test his endurance, assigning him the most difficult cases and the most demanding patients. Among those patients was Mr. Johnson, known for his bad temper and overtly racist attitude. Liana was sent to her room despite warnings from other nurses, who seemed to enjoy sending her to deal with cases they preferred to avoid. However, Liana decided to face the challenge with dignity and professionalism. Upon entering Mr. Johnson's room, she was greeted with a string of hurtful and prejudiced comments. Although Mr. Johnson's words were cruel, Liana remained calm, attending to his needs with the greatest possible dedication. When he left the room, Dr. Sutter was waiting outside with an expression that made clear his delight at observing Liana's plight. With a tone full of sarcasm, he commented, "Everything is in order, Nurse Brooks. Are you sure you can handle this load?" Liana replied firmly, "Mr. Johnson is stable, Doctor. Is there anything else you need from me?" Dr. Sutter, somewhat surprised by her calm response, merely grimaced disdainfully before walking away. As he left, Liana felt pressure to prove once again that she would not be intimidated. As the days went by, Liana began to notice a pattern in the way she was treated. His colleagues, especially Dr. Sutter, seemed to assign him the most difficult cases and situations that others preferred to avoid. While she maintained her professionalism, the weight of exclusion and discrimination was hard to ignore. Despite the emotional toll, Liana found an unexpected refuge in the room of Victor Harris, the VIP patient to whom she had been assigned. Victor, despite his injuries, always displayed a respectful attitude and seemed genuinely interested in meeting her. His presence represented a respite in the midst of hostility. "I'm glad to hear you're in charge of my care, Liana," he told her one day as she adjusted her IV. "It seems that you have a lot of experience." "I've been in the profession for a few years, yes," Liana replied with a smile, grateful for his kind treatment. Victor, who was watching everything carefully, began to notice the way Liana was treated by her colleagues. One day, seeing how she interacted with Dr. Sutter, who constantly tried to humiliate her in public, Victor decided to intervene. "Liana, have you noticed that Dr. Sutter looks very interested in monitoring every step you take?" he asked, noticing how the doctor followed his every move almost obsessively. Liana just nodded. Although it pained her to admit it, she knew that Dr. Sutter had a certain fixation on making her life difficult. However, he preferred to focus on his work and not be affected by his attitudes. On one occasion, as Liana finished her rounds, she overheard some of her colleagues muttering about diversity hiring and why they were at the hospital. Each hurtful comment reminded her of the difficulty of belonging to an environment where she felt she did not fit in. Victor noticed Liana's discomfort after hearing those comments and decided to approach the subject in a subtle way. He watched as she faced each day with dignity and patience, and although her eyes reflected fatigue, she was never seen to lose her composure. One day, while Liana was checking on her patient's condition, Victor said to her in a soft but firm voice, "Liana, I've seen a lot of people in my life. True strength is shown in the way we treat others, especially when we are underestimated. Keep going. You are better than they can see." These words resonated deeply with Liana, and although she didn't fully know Victor's story, she began to understand that he wasn't just an ordinary patient. There was something in his presence and in his words that gave him back the strength to continue. The days passed, and the atmosphere in the hospital continued to be hostile for Liana. Dr. Sutter seemed to have stepped up his efforts to discourage her, assigning her additional tasks and publicly challenging her at every opportunity. It was as if her mere presence caused him to have a need to prove that she didn't belong there. However, Victor Harris had become his silent supporter. Every time Liana finished a task in her room, he would look at her with a mixture of respect and determination, and she felt that there was a deep understanding of her situation in his eyes. It was as if he saw beyond appearances, noticing the injustices that were experienced in the hospital. One afternoon, while Liana was changing Victor's bandages, she overheard a conversation in the hallway. Two nurses commented in low voices, believing that no one heard them. "I don't know what they thought of when they hired her. This is not the place for someone like her," one of the nurses murmured. "I know, but what can we do?" "If we say something, they will surely accuse us of being intolerant," replied the other. Liana felt a lump in her throat, but she continued with her work, determined not to let those words get to her. However, Victor had overheard the conversation and noticed Liana's expression. With a firm look, he said, "Liana, sometimes the biggest challenge is not to endure the work, but to face the contempt of those who do not understand your value, but I assure you, they will understand it one day." Liana smiled gratefully, though she didn't answer. That day, without knowing it, Victor had become a source of inspiration for her, someone who gave her strength to keep going. That same night, as she returned home, Liana reflected on Victor's words. There was something in the way he spoke, in his gestures, that made her think that he wasn't just another patient. Although he never mentioned it openly, he seemed to have a deep connection to the values of justice and respect, and his treatment of her showed it every day. The next day, the hospital was in full swing. A high-risk surgical case was going to be observed by important members of the administration, and the atmosphere was fraught with anxiety. It was then that Dr. Sutter approached Liana with a stern expression. "Brooks, I want you to assist in this afternoon's operation. I hope you can handle the pressure," he said, in a tone that clearly hinted at his doubts about his ability. Liana calmly accepted the assignment, though she knew that Dr. Sutter's intentions were probably to test her. She spent the hours leading up to the operation, going through every detail, making sure she was prepared for any situation that might arise in the operation. When it was time for the operation, Liana entered the operating room and prepared herself with the team of doctors and nurses. Dr. Sutter seemed especially attentive, and Liana could feel the skeptical looks of some of her companions. I knew that this operation was being watched by administrative staff and board members, which added an extra layer of pressure. The operation began, and Liana concentrated to the maximum, anticipating the team's needs and demonstrating her ability with every move. However, at a critical moment, he noticed something troubling. Dr. Sutter was about to make an incision in a location that could be life-threatening. Without hesitation, Liana spoke calmly but firmly. "Doctor, I suggest approaching this area from a different angle. The patient's anatomy seems to indicate that it is the safest option." The operating room fell silent, and all eyes were on Liana. Dr. Sutter looked at her in surprise, but after a tense pause, he followed his recommendation. As the operation progressed, it became clear that Liana's suggestion had been key to avoiding a major complication. When the operation was successful, Liana felt the looks of her colleagues, some full of respect and others of envy or resentment. As she left the operating room, Dr. Sutter stopped her in the hallway with an angry expression. "Brooks, I need to talk to you right now," he said curtly. Liana followed him into a private room, where he turned to her with a restrained, angry expression. "Who do you think you are to question my decisions in the operating room?" Dr. Sutter snapped, his tone full of contempt. "Your job is to follow orders, not to think that you know more than your superiors." Liana remained calm, aware that any word could make the situation worse. But before he could answer, a firm, authoritative voice interrupted the conversation. "Dr. Sutter, I think that's enough." They both turned to see Victor Harris sitting on his bed, looking at them with a serious expression. Unknowingly, they had entered Victor's room in their argument. Dr. Sutter turned pale as he realized that his most important patient had heard every word. "I was not aware that you were awake, Mr. Harris." "I apologize, Doctor," Sutter stammered, trying to regain his composure. Victor looked at him sternly and replied, "I am well aware of what I have heard, Doctor. During my time here, I have witnessed behavior toward Nurse Brooks that is unacceptable anywhere, let alone in a hospital." Liana watched in surprise as Victor took a completely different stance, revealing an authority he had previously kept silent. Dr. Sutter tried to defend himself. "Mr. Harris, I assure you that it was all a misunderstanding. We only seek to maintain the highest standards here." Victor interrupted him firmly. "High standards include respect and professionalism, something that is clearly lacking here. This situation requires intervention, and I assure you that action will be taken." Liana, shocked by the turn of events, could barely process what was happening. Victor had not only stood up for his integrity, but seemed keen to change the culture of the hospital. For the first time since he started working at St. Mary's, he felt like someone really saw what was going on and was willing to do something about it. Dr. Sutter seemed to be in shock. He had gone from being the one who dominated the situation to being exposed and humiliated in front of his most important patient. Victor Harris, until then seen as just another patient, now emanated an authority that no one in the hospital would have anticipated. "I don't think we've been introduced correctly, Dr. Sutter," Victor said in a firm voice. "I'm Victor Harris, CEO of Healthcare United, one of the largest hospital networks in the country. My stay here was circumstantial due to an accident, but I have taken advantage of this time to observe the operation of the hospital. And what I've seen, especially in terms of the treatment of Nurse Brooks, has been shameful. The surprise on Dr. Sutter's face was evident. He tried to compose a defense, but Victor cut him off before he could say anything. I don't need explanations, Doctor. I need changes. From now on, St. Mary's will undergo a full review of her internal practices, and believe me, this review will begin with an investigation into her and her team's behavior towards Nurse Brooks. Liana was amazed, unable to believe her ears. For weeks, he had endured the rudeness and contempt in silence. And now, finally, someone with power was willing to expose that reality. Hearing Victor's instructions, Doctor. Sutter tried to maintain his composure, but he was visibly shaken. He barely managed to mumble an apology before quickly leaving the room, leaving Liana alone with Victor. Liana, Victor said in a softer voice, after a moment's silence. What you have endured in this hospital is something that no one should have to experience. I have seen your dedication and your strength. You represent the values that should be at the core of this place, and I want you to know that you have my full support to transform this environment. Liana, moved, could barely find the words to answer. After so many days of tension and loneliness, hearing those words from someone who not only understood her situation, but could act on it, gave her back a hope that she had begun to lose. Thank you, Mr. Harris. I don't know how to express how important this is to me, Liana said, her voice trembling slightly. You don't need to thank me, Liana. My role in this is minimal compared to the courage you have shown in facing each day in this hospital. Starting today, I want you to be part of the Diversity and Ethics Committee at St. Mary. Your experiences will be instrumental in the changes I plan to implement here and at other institutions in our network, Victor said with a smile. That afternoon, as news of Victor's operation spread through the hospital, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The same colleagues who had previously ignored or judged her now seemed to see her with different eyes, some coming forward to apologize, others showing interest in what would happen next. The next morning, a mandatory meeting was called for all employees in the hospital auditorium. Liana sat in the crowd, watching her colleagues mumble and speculate about the changes that might come. At the front of the auditorium, Victor Harris, with both arms still in a cast, was preparing to speak alongside the hospital administration. Victor took the microphone and, in a voice that denoted both firmness and clarity, began, "Good morning, everyone. I'm Victor Harris, CEO of Healthcare United. During my time at this hospital, I have witnessed behaviors and attitudes that, frankly, should not have a place in any medical institution. Today marks the beginning of a transformation at St. Mary's, one that requires the participation and commitment of all of you." As Victor spoke, the audience remained silent. His words were firm and clear, and his message left little room for interpretation. "I have witnessed attitudes and behaviors that not only affect our professionals, but also the quality of care our patients receive, and this is not something we can tolerate in any of our facilities," Victor continued. "Today we begin a series of changes that will transform the culture of this hospital." The administration announced that a mandatory diversity and inclusion training program would be implemented for all staff, from doctors to the cleaning crew. In addition, Victor insisted on the creation of a committee that would oversee hiring and promotion practices, ensuring that all employees had equal opportunities and an environment free of bias. Victor paused, his gaze sweeping through the crowd. Liana Brooks, who is here with us today, has demonstrated extraordinary strength and professionalism in circumstances that should never have existed. From this moment on, she will be a central figure in this transformation. Liana will be taking on a role in our new Diversity and Inclusion Committee to help us make this hospital a place where everyone can work with respect and dignity. Liana felt a mixture of pride and nervousness when she heard his name. I knew this new role would be a big responsibility, but it was also an opportunity to make a real difference. In that instant, he felt that every obstacle he had faced had a greater purpose. The meeting concluded, and when she got up, several colleagues approached her to congratulate her and apologize for her past behavior. While some apologies felt superficial, others seemed sincere, and Liana graciously accepted each one. In the days that followed, Liana worked alongside Victor and management to initiate the proposed changes. The first days were difficult, Some staff members showed resistance and resentment, while others adapted more openly. However, the atmosphere at the hospital slowly began to improve. One afternoon, at the end of her shift, Liana decided to visit Victor in his room. Despite his role as CEO, he was still her patient, and the two had developed a bond of mutual respect. "How do you feel today, Mr. Harris?" he asked with a smile. Victor smiled back, raising his still plastered arms. "I think I'm getting better, although my doctors would probably say that I worry more about work than about my recovery." Liana laughed and nodded. "That doesn't surprise me at all." Victor motioned for her to sit down. "Liana, I want to thank you. Your bravery and dedication are not only changing this hospital, but they have inspired me to review our practices across the Healthcare United network. What you're achieving here has the potential to transform the industry." Liana was silent for a moment, taking in the impact of his words. He felt that his struggle, although difficult, was beginning to bear fruit. In the weeks that followed, changes at St. Mary's General Hospital began to take hold. The Diversity Committee and the new Inclusion Program under Liana's supervision were making a real impact. The trainings were conducted rigorously, and the staff, although initially reluctant, began to show a more open and collaborative attitude. One morning, while reviewing the schedule of activities for the committee, Liana was surprised by an unexpected visitor, Megan Lewis. The nurse, who had been distant from her at first, now approached with an expression of sincere gratitude. "Liana, I wanted to thank you," Megan said nervously. "I had no idea how much damage we were causing with our attitude. This process has made me see things differently, and I want you to know that I am here to support you." Liana smiled, accepting Megan's gesture. She knew that it would not be easy for some colleagues to accept the change, but little by little she was seeing results, and that filled her with hope. As the hospital moved forward with its transformation, management also made an important decision about Dr. Sutter. Following an investigation into his conduct and complaints from several staff members, it was determined that his behavior was incompatible with the hospital's values and he was dismissed. This news was a relief for many, and for Liana, it meant the closure of a stage of hostility. One afternoon, Liana received an invitation to speak at a conference on inclusion in health. There, she recounted her experience and the process of change she had experienced at St. Mary's, highlighting the importance of having leaders who value their employees and promote an environment of respect. His speech was greeted with standing ovations, and the hospital's story became a case study for other health institutions. Victor, now fully recovered, attended the conference and congratulated Liana at the end of his presentation. "You've done an extraordinary job, Liana," he said, with an expression of pride. "Not only did you change the culture of St. Mary's, but you've inspired the entire healthcare system to rethink how we treat our professionals." Liana smiled, grateful for his words and aware of the magnitude of his impact. Upon returning to the hospital, Liana noticed a change in the environment. Staff members worked more harmoniously, and there was genuine respect in interactions. Even in times of stress, the team supported each other, and Liana felt that St. Mary had finally become the inclusive and professional place she had always wanted. Months passed, and Liana, now with more responsibilities, remained committed to the mission of improving the work environment at the hospital. In addition, she began to receive invitations from other health centers seeking to implement similar changes in their institutions, which reaffirmed that her work was not only having an impact locally, but also at the national level. Victor, who had returned to his routine as CEO of Healthcare United, continued to stay in touch with Liana, supporting her initiatives and expanding the reach of inclusion programs across the hospital network. They both knew their effort was just beginning, but they were determined to keep going. Liana had gone from being an isolated, underrated nurse to becoming a leader of change, and that transformation was just as meaningful as the one she had accomplished for St. Mary's. For her, this hospital was now much more than a workplace. It had become a symbol of resistance, hope, and justice. The impact of St. Mary's transformation wasn't just limited to the walls of the hospital. Liana and Victor's story began to appear in health magazine articles and on news sites, becoming an example of how perseverance and leadership could change toxic work cultures in inclusive and respectful environments. Liana, who initially doubted whether her role on the committee would be enough to bring about real change, now saw how her effort was making its mark on the lives of others in her field. Every day, I received messages from health professionals across the country, thanking him for inspiring them to fight for fairer work environments. A year after joining St. Mary's, Liana was invited to a national health conference as a keynote speaker. In her speech, she shared how the experience at the hospital had taught her that justice and equity were just as essential as the care they provided to their patients. Their message was clear. Strength and respect at work not only benefited employees, but also improved patient care. Victor Harris also attended the event, and as he listened to Liana's words, he felt a deep satisfaction. I knew that her intervention at St. Mary's had been crucial, but it was Liana who had really driven the change, with her steadfastness and dedication. "Liana, I'm proud of you," Victor said at the end of the conference. "You have accomplished so much more than I imagined when I met you in that first week at St. Mary's." "It wouldn't have been possible without your support, Mr. Harris," Liana replied humbly. "You gave me the opportunity and the confidence to fight for this change." As St. Mary's continued its transformation, the new professionals joining the hospital were already finding a refreshed environment, free from the prejudices Liana had faced on her first day. The administration bolstered diversity and inclusion programs, ensuring that Liana's legacy lived on. In the hospital, a new plaque was installed in the main lobby. It was dedicated to the values of inclusion and respect, with a message that highlighted the importance of diversity in St. Mary's mission. Seeing her, Liana felt that every obstacle, every difficult moment had been worth it. One day, while walking through the corridors of the hospital, Liana came across a young nurse who had just been hired. The nurse stopped her timidly. "Sorry, I just wanted to say that I really admire the work you've done here, Liana. Thank you for opening the way for those of us who come after us." Liana smiled, remembering her own start in the hospital and how she had felt. Now, thanks to the change he helped initiate, other health professionals could start their careers without fearing about the color of their skin or their origin. St. Mary's culture had changed forever, and Liana knew that the impact of her work would continue long after she left the hospital. Victor and Liana continued to collaborate, extending these same principles to other hospitals in the Healthcare United network. For both, this transformation was no longer just an initiative. It was a mission to ensure that every health centre was a place of respect and dignity for all. As St. Mary's transformation continued to progress, other hospitals in the Healthcare United network began to embrace the inclusion and respect programs initiated there. Victor Harris, now convinced that these changes were not only fair but essential to the well-being of patients and staff, implemented similar policies at all facilities under his direction. Liana, in her new leadership role, frequently travelled to other hospitals, sharing her experience and helping other professionals understand the importance of building inclusive environments. His story became a model of inspiration, and wherever he went, he received words of gratitude and respect for his work. On one of his visits to a hospital in another city, a young doctor approached him after a lecture. "Liana, your story changed my perspective," he said. "I've faced challenges in my career too, but I never thought it would be possible to make real change. Thank you for showing us that it is possible." Liana, moved, thanked him sincerely. It was in these moments, seeing the impact of his struggle on others, that he felt that all his effort had paid off. The nights when she had felt lonely and burdened at St. Mary's now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a deeper sense of purpose. Meanwhile, St. Mary's Hospital continued to thrive under this new culture. Patients noticed the difference in the environment, and many began to comment on the human quality of the staff. Satisfaction surveys showed significant improvements, and the hospital's reputation grew, not only for its medical excellence, but also for its commitment to inclusion. A year later, at a special ceremony at the hospital, Victor Harris took the microphone to address the staff and guests. "What we've accomplished here at St. Mary's is an example of what can be done when you listen to those who are struggling and take action to do the right thing," he said. "Liana Brooks taught us that justice and respect are not just words, but values that we must put into practice every day." The audience erupted in applause, and Liana, sitting in the front row, felt a surge of emotions wash over her. She remembered everything she had been through since her first day in the hospital and how each challenge had led her to this moment. At the conclusion of the ceremony, Victor approached Liana and shook her hand. "Liana, this celebration is as much for you as it is for everyone who works here. You have changed not only this hospital, but the path of many people in the healthcare industry." Liana smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude and humility. "It was everyone's effort, but I'm thankful you believed in me when I needed it," she said. "This is just the beginning. There's a lot to do, and I'm ready to move on." In the months that followed, Liana dedicated herself to expanding diversity and inclusion programs in other areas of Healthcare United. The legacy of her work at St. Mary's inspired similar changes elsewhere, and little by little, the healthcare industry began to transform into a more inclusive and respectful sector. For Liana, the journey from being an underappreciated and isolated nurse to becoming a change leader was proof that perseverance and courage could break down barriers. St. Mary's was now a symbol of that change, a place where every person, no matter their background, could work with dignity and pride. Over time, inclusion and respect programs at Healthcare United reached hospitals and clinics across the country, thanks to the shared vision between Liana and Victor Harris. For both of them, this project was no longer just a policy of improvement, but a movement for real change in the health sector. Liana's work had not only transformed culture at St. Mary's, now its impact was felt in many places that had also suffered from toxic and exclusionary environments. Liana continued to receive invitations to conferences and seminars where she shared her experience, and respect for her only increased. She was seen as a pioneer in inclusion changes in the medical field, someone who had faced personal adversities and turned them into a catalyst to improve the conditions of others. One day, during a visit to a newly incorporated hospital, Liana was greeted by a group of professionals who had been writing to her for months to thank her. Among them was Megan Lewis, the nurse at St. Mary's who had been so distant in the past. Seeing Liana, Megan walked over with an expression of sincere respect. "Liana, I'm glad to see you again. I never told you at St. Mary's, but I want to thank you for the patience you showed. I learned a lot from you, and those changes you initiated have inspired me to do the same here at my new hospital." Liana smiled, moved, and thanked Megan for her gesture. He knew that his journey had had an impact not only on policies and programs, but on the people themselves. She had planted seeds of change in hearts and minds, and now she saw the fruits in the work of others like Megan. Meanwhile, Victor Harris continued to lead the expansion of Healthcare United's values. In one of his meetings with Liana, he spoke to her about the possibility of extending these same principles to primary care clinics and doctors' offices, where inclusion was as necessary as in large hospitals. "Liana, your story has been the basis of all this. We have seen St. Mary's go from being a prejudiced environment to a model of respect and collaboration. Imagine what we could achieve if this same approach reached every corner of the country," Victor told him. Liana nodded, full of enthusiasm. With each passing day, she felt more inspired to continue the mission they had started. She remembered her first day at St. Mary's, Dr. Sutter's cold gaze, the whispers behind her, and now she felt like it had all been worth it. She had transformed adversity into a force for change, and she was ready to take that mission as far as possible. A few months later, Victor and Liana hosted a large event in St. Mary's to celebrate the anniversary of the changes implemented. During the event, Liana received special recognition for her contribution to inclusion and respect in the health system. It was a proud moment, and as she went on stage to receive the award, she looked at the audience and remembered all the people who had supported her. "This is not just an achievement of mine," Liana said in her speech. "It is the result of the work and dedication of each person who joined this mission, who believed in the possibility of change, and who had the courage to fight for an environment of respect and dignity for all." The applause was deafening. Liana looked at Victor in the front row, who was watching her with a smile of pride and satisfaction. I knew it had been a journey full of challenges, but together they had accomplished something incredible. At the end of the ceremony, Liana reflected on the road travelled. She had come to St. Mary's Hospital as a nurse, facing scorn and discrimination, and was now a respected leader who had made a difference in her industry. His legacy would not only remain in St. Mary's, but in every hospital and clinic that embraced these principles. Liana and Victor's mission would continue, but in that moment, surrounded by applause and expressions of appreciation, Liana knew that change had already begun, and that it was only the beginning of a transformation that would continue to grow. As the years went by, the work of Liana and Victor Harris continued to generate transformations in the health sector. Healthcare United's commitment to the values of diversity, respect and inclusion became a national benchmark, and soon other organizations began implementing similar programs inspired by St. Mary's success. Liana's work began to reach beyond the health sector. Universities and medical training centers began inviting her to speak to students and future professionals, sharing her experience and teaching them to advocate for inclusion and respect from their earliest stages in the profession. In each talk, Liana emphasized the importance of resilience, empathy, and commitment to building environments where everyone was valued. One of the most meaningful moments for Liana came when she received an invitation to an event at her old nursing school. Returning to the place where he had started his career, he remembered his mother's words, "You're going to have to fight twice as hard as everyone else, but never let them see you fall." Now, those words resonated with a new depth and meaning. During her speech, Liana shared how she had transformed obstacles into an opportunity for change. Her story had become a life lesson, an inspiration to the next generation of nurses and doctors. Many students, especially those from underrepresented communities, would come up to her at the end of the event to thank her for her example and for showing them that they could make a difference, no matter what difficulties they encountered along the way. As Healthcare United continued to expand its inclusion programs, Victor proposed to Liana that she take an even bigger role in the organization. Her vision and leadership had made her a key figure, and Victor wanted her to lead a new department dedicated solely to promoting equity and respect at all levels of the organization. "Liana, your commitment to this mission has been extraordinary," Victor told her. "There is no one better suited to lead this large-scale effort." Liana accepted the challenge, excited by the opportunity to continue contributing to a lasting transformation in the health system. The new role allowed her to develop mentoring programs for young professionals, diversity advice for managers, and continuous training in inclusion for all the hospitals in the network. Over time, these programs not only benefited Healthcare United professionals, but became a model for other healthcare organizations, setting a standard for respect and excellence. On one of her last visits to St. Mary's, Liana walked the halls that had once been cold and hostile. Now, the hospital was brimming with a collaborative atmosphere, and smiles and respect were the norm in every interaction. Seeing the new nurses, doctors, and support staff working together, he felt deep satisfaction and pride. Standing in front of the plaque in the lobby that read, "Diversity is our strength, inclusion is our commitment, compassion is our calling," Liana knew her mission at St. Mary's had reached a climax. He had left a legacy that would not only impact patients and hospital staff, but also inspire future generations. With one last look at the hospital, Liana said goodbye to a place that had once tested her, but had also propelled her to be the leader she had always carried inside. She knew her work didn't end there, but she was also certain that St. Mary's would continue to thrive as a symbol of hope, justice, and respect. As Liana walked away from St. Mary's that day, she reflected on the long journey she had travelled. What began as a challenge full of adversity had transformed into a mission that now transcended the walls of a single hospital. With each step, I felt like I carried with me the experiences of all health professionals facing similar challenges, and also the hope for a better system. As she moved into her new role at Healthcare United, Liana continued to expand inclusion programs to every corner of the organization. It implemented a policy of equal opportunity and access to training resources for staff at all levels, ensuring that every person from administrative staff to medical specialists had the support needed to grow and develop in a safe and respectful environment. The impact of his work was felt throughout the Healthcare United network, and soon many other institutions began to follow suit. Articles about Liana and her story were published in medical journals and national media, and her name became synonymous with resilience and change in the healthcare industry. One day, at a conference to which she had been invited as a keynote speaker, Liana received national recognition for her contribution to equity and inclusion in the health field. As she took the stage, applause echoed throughout the room, and she remembered the days when she had doubted herself, those moments of loneliness when only her determination remained. Upon taking the microphone, Liana began her speech. "This recognition is an honor, but I want you to know that this achievement is not only mine. It is the result of the joint effort of people who decided that respect and dignity should be the basis of our work. I am here thanks to every person who believed in the possibility of change, every professional who faces challenges on a daily basis and does not give up. The audience, made up of doctors, nurses, administrators, and students, listened in silence, inspired by his words." Liana shared her experience at St. Mary's, not only the difficult times, but also the gratitude she felt for those who had supported her and for the positive impact they had made together. Following the event, Liana returned to her office at Healthcare United, where a committed team of professionals worked alongside her on the mission to promote inclusion at every hospital in the network. Although his journey at St. Mary's was over, he knew the work was far from over. His story would continue to inspire others, showing that perseverance and justice could change the course of an institution and improve the lives of many. From that day on, Liana dedicated herself to supporting other emerging leaders, providing them with the tools and support that she herself would have wanted in her early days. His life had become a testament that with courage and determination, lasting change could be achieved, and that every act of justice and respect was a step towards a more equitable future in the health sector. Finally, on a quiet autumn afternoon, Liana stopped to contemplate what she had accomplished. She knew that her legacy would live on in hospitals that now thrived under a culture of inclusion, in professionals who worked with pride and respect, and in future generations who would see in her a model of leadership and compassion. St. Mary's, the hospital that had been her first challenge, was now a symbol of transformation, and Liana Brooks, a tireless leader, knew that every step of her journey had paid off. With one last look of satisfaction, she prepared to move forward, ready to face any new challenge that came her way, with the same courage that had brought her there. After that moment of reflection, Liana moved on, extending her impact far beyond what she ever imagined. Her work at Healthcare United continued to be a benchmark for innovation in inclusion, and each hospital that adopted the practices she had helped develop became a new pillar in the movement for equitable and just healthcare. One day, Liana received a special invitation. A prestigious university wished to award her an honorary doctorate in recognition of her dedication to equality and respect in medicine. Arriving at the graduation event, Liana felt a surge of excitement as she saw hundreds of young graduates in front of her. Upon receiving the honor, she recalled the days when, as a rookie nurse, she had faced such a hostile environment. Now, standing in front of a new generation of professionals, his message was clear and powerful. "You're the next generation of healthcare leaders," he said in a firm voice. "They have in their hands the opportunity to build a system of care based on respect, inclusion, and compassion. Never doubt the impact they can have even when the path seems challenging. Remember that every small act of justice, every show of empathy, can transform lives." Liana's words resonated deeply in the auditorium. At the end of his speech, the graduates rose to a standing ovation. For many of them, Liana had become an example of what was possible to achieve with determination and solid values. It was a moment of fulfillment for her, a reaffirmation that her work and sacrifices had a purpose that went far beyond herself. After the ceremony, several students came to thank him and share their own stories of overcoming. Liana listened to each story with attention and affection, aware that, in those young people, she saw her own beginning in the profession reflected. He felt that each of those interactions was an opportunity to further strengthen the legacy he had built. Over time, Liana continued to lead inclusion and respect initiatives, support other professionals, and provide mentorship to those facing challenges similar to those she had overcome. Each hospital in Healthcare United's network carried at its core the values she had championed, and many others outside the network began implementing programs inspired by her work. Finally, after years of tireless service, Liana decided to retire. He knew that his legacy was in good hands and that the movement he had started would continue to grow and evolve. On his last visit to St. Mary's, he walked the halls once again, greeting the staff, who were now a diverse and vibrant mix of dedicated and committed professionals. Before leaving, he stopped in front of the plaque in the lobby and smiled as he read the words symbolizing his mission. Diversity is our strength, inclusion is our commitment, compassion is our calling. To her, those words were a reminder that any change, no matter how small, could lay the foundation for a better future. Looking one last time at the hospital, Liana felt at peace. He had transformed not only the work environment, but also the lives of many, and he knew that his legacy would live on in every healthcare professional who cared for a patient with respect and dignity. With a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction, Liana said goodbye to St. Mary's, leaving behind a story of perseverance and justice that would inspire future generations. Thus, Liana Brooks closed an important chapter of her life, but the impact of her work would continue to resonate in hospitals, in classrooms, and in the hearts of those who had once been touched by her work. And as she moved toward new horizons, Liana knew that her mission, in many ways, was just beginning. After her retirement, Liana continued to receive invitations to speak at conferences and to collaborate on research projects on inclusion and diversity in health. Although he was no longer on the front lines of daily work in hospitals, he accepted some of these invitations with the intention of continuing to inspire others. One such invitation led her to an international forum on health and human rights in Geneva. There she shared her experience alongside leaders of health organizations around the world, highlighting how the principles of equity and respect could transform not only institutions, but entire communities. The audience listened with admiration as Liana recounted how she had seen the culture of collaboration and support flourish in Healthcare United's hospitals, and how inclusion had improved not only working conditions, but also patient outcomes. During the forum, a representative of the World Health Organization approached him and proposed that he collaborate on a global project to implement inclusion programs in hospitals in developing countries. The idea of bringing her principles and experience to a global context thrilled Liana, who immediately agreed. He knew that his mission could have an even greater impact and that there were many areas of the world where these changes were needed. On her first visit to a hospital in Africa, Liana met a young nurse named Amara. Amara reminded Liana of her own beginnings. She was a passionate and competent professional who faced great challenges due to a lack of resources and often little respect for her work. Inspired by Liana's story, Amara began implementing small changes at her hospital, from creating support groups among staff to hosting trainings in empathy and patient-centered care. Liana kept in touch with Amara and other professionals from different parts of the world who sought her out for guidance. With each success story, Liana felt that her work had not only made its mark on hospitals in her country, but was now expanding around the world. As the years passed, Liana's work cemented itself as a living legacy. Hospitals that adopted her inclusion programs continued to thrive, and many healthcare professionals looked to Liana as a mentor and a source of inspiration. For many, her story was proof that dignity, equity, and compassion were not just abstract values, but transformative principles capable of changing lives. In her later years, Liana wrote a book about her life and work titled Courage in Care: Transforming Health with Inclusion and Respect. The book was met with praise and became a reference for those studying health management, leadership, and diversity in professional settings. Through its pages, Liana shared her learnings, her struggles and her triumphs, offering a guide to future generations on how to build inclusive and just spaces. When she finally retired completely from public life, Liana felt a deep satisfaction. She knew that she had given her best to a mission that had begun in a small hospital but had reached a global scale. Now I saw a new generation of leaders continue their work, bringing the message of inclusion and respect to every corner of the world. Liana Brooks's story became a symbol of hope and change in global health, and her legacy endured as proof that true care goes beyond the physical realm, touching the soul and spirit of those who dedicate their lives to healing and helping others. Over the years, Liana Brooks' impact was felt in much broader sectors than health. Her book, Courage in Care: Transforming Health with Inclusion and Respect, had transcended into other fields, inspiring business leaders, educators, and activists. Soon he began receiving invitations from companies, universities, and non-profits, all eager to learn how they could apply his principles in their own environments. Liana began teaching an online course on inclusive leadership, accessible to people from all over the world, from students to managers. This course, structured in modules based on their personal experience, provided practical tools to confront discrimination, foster respect, and build collaborative work cultures. Through forums and live sessions, Liana kept in direct contact with hundreds of people taking the course, guiding them and sharing anecdotes of her own challenges. In one of the classes, she met Manuel, a doctor who worked in a rural area of Latin America and who faced problems similar to those she had experienced in her early days in St. Mary's. Manuel described how he felt isolated for trying to implement inclusive practices in a system that, for years, had operated in a very closed and hierarchical way. Inspired by Liana, he began to apply the strategies he had learned, forming support groups among his colleagues and hosting training meetings on empathy and collaboration. Months later, Manuel wrote to Liana telling her how the changes he had initiated had significantly improved the team's morale and patient care. For Liana, stories like Manuel's were at the heart of her mission. Knowing that his experience helped other professionals find the value to change their environments was an immense satisfaction, and he felt that his legacy was alive in each of those people who fought to improve treatment and justice in their workplaces. Over the years, Liana received several international awards and distinctions in recognition of her work, and as her influence continued to grow, an unexpected moment came: a proposal to make a documentary about her life. The production team wanted to capture her story from her beginnings as a nurse at St. Mary's to her role as a leader of a global movement. At first, Liana hesitated. "I'd always preferred to keep a discreet profile, focused on work rather than recognition." But then she thought about the impact her story might have on others and agreed, hoping that the documentary would serve as a source of inspiration for those who were silently fighting for their rights and dignity. The documentary, titled Light in the Halls, the story of Liana Brooks, toured film festivals and reached a global audience. Seeing her life and work reflected on the screen was an emotional experience for Liana, who was reunited with memories that she had left behind, but that she now saw with deep gratitude. The story not only showed his accomplishments, but also the hardships, loneliness, and doubts he had felt in his struggle. Through interviews, both from former colleagues and those he had inspired, the documentary reflected the true impact of his life and mission. With the success of the documentary, many people found in Liana a symbol of hope and justice. His story was used in educational and training programs around the world, and social media was filled with messages of thanks and admiration. Professionals from various areas were beginning to create their own support groups, inspired by the values of respect and equity that Liana had championed since her days at St. Mary's. Throughout this last stage of her life, Liana found peace in seeing her legacy live on in the actions of others. At home, surrounded by memories and thank you letters from people all over the world, Liana Brooks reflected on how, although her mission had begun as a personal struggle in a small hospital, it had transcended borders and transformed lives into places she never imagined reaching. In the end, Liana knew that her story of perseverance and transformation was not only hers, but that of all those who sought to build a better world from respect and compassion. With the documentary Light in the Halls, the story of Liana Brooks still resonating around the world, Liana felt more connected than ever to her mission and the global community she had inspired. Universities, health centers, businesses, and human rights organizations now used her story as a pillar to promote programs of inclusion, respect, and collaboration at all levels. In many parts of the world, training and leadership centers bearing his name had sprung up, aimed at empowering young leaders committed to justice and social change. A few years later, at an international ceremony where she was awarded the Global Humanitarian Contribution Award, Liana was honored alongside other leaders of change from various sectors. As he took the stage to receive the recognition, he recalled his first day at St. Mary's, when everything had seemed so adverse and complicated. In his words of thanks, he reflected on the value of perseverance and the importance of staying true to one's values, even when circumstances seemed daunting. "This recognition is not just for me," he humbly told the audience. "It is for all those who have found the courage to stand up for dignity in their workplaces, for those who challenge injustices and become a voice for change. We are all part of this mission." At that moment, he received an ovation that lasted several minutes. Upon getting off the stage, he met a familiar figure, Victor Harris. Although the two had kept in touch over the years, each other's commitments had led them down different paths. Victor, who was now a respected public health policy advisor, hugged her and smiled at her with affection and admiration. "Liana, what you've accomplished is extraordinary. I never imagined how far you would go when we met at St. Mary's. You've changed so many people's lives, and I couldn't be prouder to have been a part of your journey," he said. Liana smiled, grateful to have Victor there, and replied, "And none of this would have been possible without your support and trust. At a time when I needed an ally, you were that person who believed in me and helped me take the first step. I will always carry that in my heart." After the ceremony, Liana and Victor spent the evening reminiscing about anecdotes and reflecting on the years of struggle, learning, and transformation. For both, it was a reminder that human connections, based on respect and mutual support, could be a monumental force for change. As the months passed, Liana returned to her home, now a refuge filled with memories of her career and accomplishments. The walls were adorned with photographs of important moments, thank you letters from professionals, and memorabilia from their travels around the world. Although his active career was over, his legacy lived on in every story and in every health center he operated with the principles he had helped establish. At the end of her life, Liana Brooks left this world surrounded by friends, colleagues, and a community that had seen her as a mentor, a leader, and an inspiration. His funeral was a tribute not only to his life but also to his mission. People from different countries and professions traveled to honor the woman who had dedicated her life to fighting for dignity and respect in the healthcare system and beyond. His epitaph, carved from a simple stone, read, "Here rests Liana Brooks, a voice of justice, a spirit of compassion, and a light in the halls of those who care and heal." The legacy of Liana Brooks lived on in the hearts and deeds of those who continued her mission. His story became a symbol of what was possible when one person, with determination and courage, dedicated himself to transforming a system from within. Healthcare United Hospitals and many other institutions continued to carry out the programs she had started, and new generations of healthcare professionals grew up under the example of inclusion, respect, and compassion that Liana Brooks had left as a legacy. The world of healthcare, and beyond, would forever remember Liana Brooks not only for what she did, but for the way she inspired others to do the same, building a future where every life was valued and every voice heard. Over time, Liana Brooks' life and legacy became an inspiration that transcended generations. His story was taught in universities and in health and leadership training academies. The movement she had started to promote equity and inclusion not only continued, but grew globally, driven by all those who found in her a guide and a role model. In hospitals everywhere, spaces dedicated to his memory were created. Training rooms, mentoring programs, and diversity centers were named after him, reminding everyone of the importance of a fair and respectful work environment. In every corner where healthcare equity was discussed, his name was mentioned with admiration. One of the greatest tributes to Liana was the founding of an international organization called the Liana Brooks Foundation for Health Equity, created by Healthcare United in collaboration with leaders from various institutions. The foundation's mission was to continue Liana's work, supporting health professionals in low-resource countries, providing them with tools, training, and support to establish safe and respectful work environments. Each year, the Foundation awarded scholarships and awards to emerging leaders who demonstrated the same spirit of justice and dedication that characterized Liana. Those who received the Liana Brooks Award were recognized as agents of change in their communities, people committed to carrying forward the mission of dignity and equity that she had begun. Decades after her passing, Liana's legacy lived on. At an awards ceremony at the Liana Brooks Foundation, a young doctor who had received a scholarship from the organization, spoke in his speech about the impact she had had on his life. "I grew up in a community where access to healthcare was limited and where respect for healthcare workers was not always guaranteed. It was the story of Liana Brooks that inspired me to enter the medical field, to fight for a fair and equitable system. Today, thanks to his legacy, I work to build hospitals where every person, both patients and professionals, are valued and respected." The audience, moved, applauded enthusiastically, recalling how the work of a single person had borne fruit in so many lives and communities. In that room, surrounded by people from all over the world, Liana's presence felt stronger than ever. In every story, in every change initiated in hospitals, and in every professional who fought to improve their environment, Liana Brooks' spirit continued to shine. His life had become a permanent light, a guide for those who believed in the possibility of a future where respect and dignity were fundamental rights in any workplace. And so, Liana Brooks' name became synonymous with hope, a legacy that reminded the world that with courage and compassion, any system can be transformed, and that a single person, with a clear purpose, can change the course of history. Over the years, Liana Brooks' influence went beyond the realm of health. Her story inspired professionals in different fields: education, justice, business, and social services, all interested in building inclusive and equitable spaces. Liana's words and principles began to resonate in every corner of the world where justice and dignity were at stake. An annual day of remembrance called Liana Brooks Dignity and Inclusion Day was established, in which organizations from various sectors celebrated her legacy by conducting community service activities, empathy trainings, and inclusion programs. On this day, hospitals, schools, businesses, and communities around the world hosted workshops and conferences and shared stories of how Liana had impacted their lives. Each year at St. Mary's General Hospital, the team hosted a special ceremony in the hospital lobby in front of the plaque that read, "Diversity is our strength, inclusion is our commitment, compassion is our calling." Liana's former colleagues, young professionals, and health leaders gathered to pay tribute to the nurse who had transformed not only her hospital, but also the health system. It was an emotional day, full of reflections and renewals of commitment to the values she had defended. As generations passed, the history books began to mention Liana Brooks as a pioneer in the fight for healthcare equity, a woman who broke barriers and challenged systems to build a legacy of inclusion and dignity. Her story was taught in leadership and ethics classrooms, where her example served as an inspiration to those seeking to challenge unjust norms and build institutions that respected all. In the city where she had started her career, a community health centre was built in her honour, the Liana Brooks Community Health Centre. This centre was dedicated to providing medical care to people of all ages and backgrounds, making sure that each patient received the same level of respect and care that Liana had always promoted. On its walls, a large image of Liana reminded everyone of her vision of health as a universal and dignified right. One day, a young nurse named Elena, who worked at the community centre, discovered Liana's story while reviewing training materials. Inspired by his life, Elena set out to follow in his footsteps, championing inclusion and respect in her work. Years later, Elena also became a leader recognized for her dedication to these values, and in every interview, in every speech, she mentioned Liana Brooks as the reason why she had decided to pursue medicine with compassion and justice. Thus, the legacy of Liana Brooks was kept alive, not only in memories and tributes, but also in each person who found in her story the courage to make a difference. Her name had become a universal symbol, a promise that the world of health and work could be spaces of inclusion and respect for all. And so, the spirit of Liana Brooks continued to light up the halls of hospitals, schools, and communities, reminding everyone that a future of dignity and justice is always within reach for those who have the courage to fight for it. Decades after her death, Liana Brooks' name remained a global symbol of justice, inclusion, and dignity in health and beyond. Each year, Dignity and Inclusion Day, Liana Brooks continued to inspire people of all ages and professions to take action in their communities, to challenge prejudice, and to build spaces where every life is valued. At St. Mary's General Hospital, the memory of Liana was integral to their culture. The story of how a single nurse, in the face of adversity, had transformed the essence of the hospital was told to each new employee as a reminder of the values that should guide their work. The young nurses and doctors found in Liana's story an example of courage and ethics, a model that reminded them that they could make a real difference in the world. In an act of renovation, the hospital decided to create a new wing dedicated to teaching and training in ethical leadership and empathy, calling it the Liana Brooks Leadership and Compassion Training Wing. This space hosted workshops, simulation labs, and conferences that prepared future health professionals to see their work not just as a science, but as a humane and compassionate service. Each year, the best students and health leaders were recognized with the Liana Brooks Leadership Award, and in receiving it, they promised to continue their legacy of respect and inclusion in their own journeys. For many, winning this award was the greatest honor, a reminder that true leadership was found in serving others with dignity and humanity. In every corner of the world, wherever there were professionals inspired by her story, Liana Brooks' name was remembered as a source of hope and transformation. His life had touched millions of people, and in the hearts of those fighting for fair and equitable treatment, his spirit lived on, a reminder that change is always possible. And so, Liana Brooks's legacy endured, leaving an indelible mark on the world. She had started out as a nurse in a hospital that rejected her, but she became a guiding light for generations, proving that compassion, respect, and courage could transform lives and heal not only bodies but also hearts and communities. Liana Brooks was more than a health professional. It was a force for change and proof that a single person committed to justice and respect can transform the world forever.